Yeah, so the application server release is just a small bug fix release for a problem that was noticed. The main problem was one that was noticed with a change to an upstream component called Pydantic. It just caused a few issues with the application server. So there was a small bug fix put in to fix those compatibility issues. And the second thing that's just been changed is a return code from one of the M3 interfaces so that it matches the new 26512 17.7 spec return codes. So there was a change from a 422 to a 400 on the purge operation. So that's a very small change, just a bug fix release really there. So we added several new features and made some enhancements to the way some of the existing bits worked. So the three main new features are consumption reporting, network assistance delivery boost, and dynamic policies that we added in. The last two, the network assistance delivery boost and the dynamic policies, need a working 5G core to integrate with in order to function properly. And there's details in the wiki page about configuring the relevant settings in the configuration file to interface to your 5G core. The consumption reporting was to go along with some of the work that Shalin and Daniel had done on the UE side for consumption reports, and the part in the application function provides the provisioning, the advertising of consumption, the request for consumption reports by the service access information, and allows the reception of consumption reports from the UE. There is no data collection AF in the application function at the moment, so all these reports just get stored to disk for now. And we're looking at, there's a current project on to add a proper data collection AF with all the relevant interfaces. As far as the enhancements go, mostly for our Linode installation, we needed some proper Acme certificate management so that we could use Let's Encrypt certificates. So I wrote a second certificate management script. The default one just does self-signed certificates for testing purposes, but you can change in the configuration file to the path for the Acme certificate management if you want to use Let's Encrypt certificates. And we did we improved within the code, so I updated some of the background code generation templates to add in some extra validation for all the APIs. So there's some extra validation on fields coming through on M1, M5 interfaces. This is number range checking and checking of enumerated type names. So the AF will now generate errors, and the actual reason for the error is now propagated back in the response as well. So it will tell you if one of your fields was out of range or if it didn't understand one of the enumerated values. And the last main enhancement was an uplift to make all the interfaces comply with TS26512 17.7. So this does affect some of the data structures used on both the M1 and the M5 interfaces. And then just a couple of extra bug fixes. So there was some memory leaks quashed and just some corrections to some existing parsing issues that were fixed.
Aligned with what I wanted to present anyways, is how to more or less test the new release of the application function and use it. And you know that we have a lot of tools available already. We have the Python tool by David, the M1 session tool that you can use from the terminal in order to more or less do all the requests that are required in order to configure the application function. And we also have FOKUS working on the web. It's like a user interface that lets you also control the application function that uses the Python scripts that David implemented under the hood. And now there is a third thing you can do, which is more or less a Postman collection that we shared with the community today. For those of you who don't know Postman, it's like a graphical tool that allows you to send and manage HTTP requests. And the great thing about Postman is that you can create certain collections containing a lot of different requests, and then you can share that with other users of Postman. And there are some additional features included in Postman, for instance, using variables and defining certain environments and workflows that make it really well suited for testing the application function, also configuring the application function. So let me quickly show you how this looks like. And we have this wiki article in place now, so you can try this out on your own. But I basically have a Postman installation here on my machine. And on the left side here, you can see, and let me close this for a second, that we have defined more or less two different collections containing different HTTP requests, one for the M1 configuration and one for also using the M5 interface. I have a application function running on my Linux machine that is next to me. It's connected via remote desktop. So it's running the application function, also the application server. I did not start an Open5JS core or any other core, so it's not directly connected to a core. So that's why we can also I cannot really use the policy templates and network assistance at this point. But still, it's enough to just demonstrate how this Postman collection works and how you can use it in order to configure and test the application function. So we have open sourced these collections that you can see here, and also the necessary environment variables that I will show you in a bit. You can find that all on the wiki. You can also find the getting started guide in the wiki. So as I said, you can more or less reproduce what I'm showing right now very quickly. But basically, if I go to the M1 interface here and the calls that are relevant for M1, you can see that we divided that by creating and managing provisioning sessions, consumption reports, and also policy templates. So more or less everything that the application function is now supporting. One great thing, I mentioned this in the beginning about the Postman tool, is that you can define certain variables. So for instance, in this route, you see that I have defined a variable called M1_URL. And if I go to environment and 5G Mac here, you can see that M1_URL simply points to, let's say, my local deployed application function. And the great thing about that is that I configure that in one place, and then I can use it in my different routes. So all of them will contain this placeholder, more or less, that is automatically populated based on what you put in the environment variable. And the same thing goes for the provisioning session ID. So this one is also auto-populated. Once we create a provisioning session, we need to assign this value to a variable, and then it can be used in the other routes as well. And this saves you a lot of time. So you don't need to copy paste this ID every time you want to send a request. It's simply being replaced and you set it once. And one thing that I also learned today, you can even write scripts in Postman. And I wrote a small script that more or less creates a provisioning session, takes the provisioning session ID from the response body down here, and then more or less overrides the existing variable that we have defined. So if I do this now, I'm creating a new provisioning session and I get the ID back from the application function. And this value here is automatically put into my environment variable. So I have this one now here as well. So there's no manual step required anymore. I can simply create a provisioning session, and then I can use the other routes here as well. So I can get the current information. I can even delete the provisioning session. And the same is true for consumption reports. So you can now use this Postman collection to create a consumption reporting configuration. You get the result back. And then if you look into M5, we can also request our service access information that contains all of these configurations. So more or less the same that you would get from the M1 session tool that you will get from the web user interface that FOKUS is currently working on, but nicely organized here in this Postman collection. The last thing I wanted to mention here, and you really have to try this out yourself if you're going to play around with the application function, the same thing that we did for the provisioning session with saving certain things in variables also works for the policy template. So we can create a policy template. And when we create this policy template, what we get back in the location header of the response is the policy template ID, which is the last ID here in this URL. And again, using a script, we can extract this information and assign that to a certain variable. And that way we automatically populate the policy template ID variable, and this one will get replaced in every URL that we are assigning it to. And that way we can easily also update existing policy templates without manually inserting any ID. So that's also very time saving in the end. So if I do this now, I can update my existing policy template, and then this should also be reflected in the service access information. So long story short, this is a very nice way in order to play around with the application function if you are hesitant to use the terminal for that or the Python scripts that are provided. And we shared this on the GitHub wiki. You can download it, try it out, and please also let us know if there's anything missing from your site in order to improve the behavior here. All right. So let me go back, because we have that now, application function, application server. To complete the announcement of all the releases today, we also released new client-side components. So that includes the common Android library, the media session handler, the media stream handler, and the 5GMS aware application. All the changes are listed in the respective release notes. Just to summarize, and I'm not going through the release notes of all of these projects now, because we are almost at the end of the call, and I also want to hand over to Niels. But the main addition, and David mentioned that, is support for consumption reporting. So the changes that we did on the client side integrate very well with what was done on the core side, on the server side, in the application function and the application server. And just to quickly demonstrate how these components work together, I'm going to start the media session handler and the 5GMS aware application on my Android phone that is connected to my laptop. Give me a second. Just need to find the right IDE. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to deploy that to the Android phone that is connected. We are working in a Wi-Fi environment here, so there's no core connected, as I said, but you will get the idea. And I'm going to show you what is on the phone right now. So this is what you can see here on the left side. I started the media session handler on my phone. Now I'm going to deploy the 5GMS aware application. And then we have a drop down here to select between different M8 endpoints. What we will use is my locally deployed application function here on my Linux laptop. So I'm selecting the third entry here. And what the application is doing now, it gets an M8 JSON, so a JSON file that includes more or less the bootstrap information that it needs in order to start playing a content and requesting the required information from the application function via the M5 interface. I can also quickly show you how this looks like. So this is more or less what I get from the application function. Again, this is something that is not really standardized. M8 interface is not in the specification. So this is a format that we more or less aligned with what is in the service access information. Let me quickly maybe format this for you. You can see how it looks like. So we showed this before. It's basically a URL to the M5 endpoint, and then a list of content that is available, including its provisioning session ID, because that is what we need in order to request the required information, and in the end also play the corresponding manifest file. You can see that in some cases the MPD is already included in the M8, but this is not a requirement. So it could only also be the case that it's only the provisioning session ID being made available here, and then we need to request all of the other information. So this is being published by the AF, as I said. If I go back to the Android application now, I can click on Start Playback here. We are fetching the service access information on the UE side, preparing the playback, and then you can see that the playback is running here. One thing that I also wanted to show quickly now is that we are really receiving consumption reports on the AF side. So if we check, let me see how we do that. So you see this provisioning session ID here that starts with 9199. Now, if I go to my Linux laptop, and I'm already in the right folder, so all of the consumption reports are stored in this folder here on the AF side. And there we should see, yeah, exactly. So we see this provisioning session ID 9199, which should correspond to what we just saw. Sorry. So here, so this is the same one. So we actually received some consumption reports. I go back to the Linux machine now. If we cd into that, then there's a folder consumption reports. And there are all the consumption reports that are arriving from the UE side at the application function. And as David mentioned, currently they are just being stored in dedicated JSON files. So I can open this in a folder here. I can pick one of that, and we can format that. This is how they look like. So this is the information that we are sending from the UE to the application function. It already includes this new syntax with a client endpoint address and a server endpoint address. It would include locations if we were connected to real 5G network here. But basically that's what we can then use later on also for triggering additional decisions, for instance, switching between 5G broadcast, 5G media streaming. Okay, so that's the end-to-end chain. It really works. Plan on my side is also to connect this to real 5G core, and then also probably gonna continue working on the UE side. Metrics reporting is still open. We have the pull request pending, but also requesting network assistance and dynamic policies. So this is still missing on the UE side.